Thank you so much for joining us for our Inspire Conference Special Education Edition. We're so grateful to have you here to learn from our amazing and knowledgeable presenters. This session will be followed by a live Q&A period.
So welcome to the session on creating inclusive experience in remote learning for our students who are blind, visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, have mobility impairments, or speech language needs. So I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Robin Lowell, and I am the Senior Manager for Accessibility for I2E, and I actually am in Issaquah, Washington, and I have been a special education teacher for 15 years in all sorts of settings, distance education, residential, itinerant, and resource room. Just one little interesting fact about me is that I have gotten to drive the world's largest container ship. And if you need to reach me, my Twitter handle is teacherinthebox, and then my email address is up on the screen as well. And I'd like to introduce my co-host today, Sarah Zachariah. So Sarah, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm both a teacher of the blind and visually impaired and certified orientation and mobility specialist, also with the Issaquah School District. I live in Seattle, just about 12 miles outside of Issaquah. I believe this is my 17th or 18th year teaching vision and orientation and mobility. And I have been a writer for the Braille Challenge competition for the last few years. And my email address is zacharias@issaquah.wednet.edu.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Okay. So let's get started, but first I want to throw this out there. So on the screen, we have a triangle, a square, and a circle. And the triangle represents three important points that you have learned today. So if you have an important point that, if we said an important part, go ahead and write it down, put a triangle next to it, draw a square. So anything that squares with you, that idea, that squares with your thinking, something you agree with that you'd like to explore a little bit more, or draw a circle and write down anything that is still circling around in your mind or you have more questions about. Because at the end of this session, we will be having a live question and answer, so you'll be able to ask those questions and talk about those points that you find of interest. So Sarah, can you give us a quick overview?
Yeah, so our goals for today's session, we're going to be talking about using technology to foster inclusion and access to remote learning. We'll be talking about using families as partners in students' learning, and we'll be creating an experience in remote learning that works for families, students, and staff.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's get introduced. So even though this is a recorded session, we can use the chat. So you can see the little speech bubble on your toolbar, and if you click that, you can type us a message. So let's start out by asking where you're connecting from today. Sarah and I are both in the Puget Sound region, and so we're excited to hear and see where everybody else is from. Okay, so again, let's stay connected. If you have thoughts or ideas, put them in the chat, because we'll be answering those chat questions throughout the presentation from behind the scenes. So put those questions in there and we'll be able to answer them. All right, so our first section, we really want to talk about families connecting with teachers and how we can make these connections happen. And they're important all the time, but even more important now. So let's think about connecting with the whole team to create a plan that works for everybody. So thinking about the best ways that you can connect with your students, connect with your families, and that families connect with a teacher. And a lot of ways to do that is using apps such as Microsoft To Do, which is a planning, a list app, just a todo.microsoft.com, and you find a lot of information about how to create lists that you can share out. Create Outlook calendars and share those. Use Gmail, use any of these different platforms that are available to connect with your families. And it's really, I think, critical is when possible, including your students in on that scheduling process So they're included and they take ownership of their learning, of their schedule and what they're doing, so they can really have that active voice in their learning. Keeping the lines of communication open. These are 3 different ways. We talked about email, but there's a communication app called Blooms that you can explore as ways to communicate with your families and the families to communicate with the teachers, so everybody knows what's going on. Seesaw, another way to connect is using Seesaw, and there's opportunities for messaging and work. And so those are just three ways. There's a lot more ways to communicate with your families and teachers. Creating systems to keep track of what your student's doing. This is really important. You can use Microsoft OneNote to create a notebook, or even just create a file system at home in your email or in paper. And it all depends on what works for you. And the key takeaway from this, these are some ideas, but the key takeaway is really find out what works for both the teacher and the families. Being able to make that connection, so it's an easy way for both families to be able to connect, but also for them to be able to remember to do it and access it easily, so that way it's doesn't become another burden or another task that they have to do, and that becomes a challenge. Translation is so important because we have a lot of families whose first language is not the language of the school. So there is a lot of opportunities to connect with families using translation software, not only in like a video conferencing, so audio translation, but also text translation. And I'll show you one of those just in a moment. So we have Microsoft Translator, where we have live captioning and subtitling and PowerPoint. There's multiple languages, 63 plus languages, and text and conversation translation. And we have Google, there's mobile real-time translation, text translation, conversation translation. So if you're just having a conversation, you can translate it. Zoom has the addition of interpreters that you can add them into meetings, and being able to do the interpretation and the interpretation button where interpreter comes and can connect with that student that needs interpreting. Blooms also, we already mentioned that as a way to connect with families, can auto translate content, and that's really important. So I'm going to actually open up a Word document I have, and when I go into my review tab, I have the opportunity right here to translate my document. So I can translate the whole document into multiple languages. It's in English now, but I can translate it right into, let's go with German. And then we can translate that entire document right into that language. But if we look at it from selection, so I'm going to go ahead and select this, and so now it's translating it into Norwegian. And so we can do those translations right in there. And from other people I've talked to, that the translation is actually pretty darn good. So we have all this opportunity for translation, and it's so important for our families to be able to get the information they need in the most accessible way, because we're going to get higher opportunities for families to engage if they know what's going on, and having it in their native language is so important. So really connecting with those families, and families connecting with your educators, and letting them know how you need the information. Sarah, can you actually tell us a little bit about your experience with connecting with families during this time?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, we've been using shared documents that we were not using prior to the closure. And I can remember in years past where if we, had a communication notebook that was sent back and forth between home and school. I'm an itinerant teacher who I'm, usually in 3 or 4 schools a day. So sometimes I would just forget to write something in the communication book. And now with everything being online, we've got the whole team on there, and we can all make comments or ask, questions for somebody else to check in on when they meet with families. So that's been really nice.
Absolutely. That's really great. And it's brought this whole new layer of being able to communicate with families in ways that we haven't before, and seeing those opportunities to connect with them. I think if we can take some silver linings from this experience is that ability to connect and bring our families into the experience with us and with our students is a really great thing that we can take away from this whole experience of remote learning.
Yeah, I think shared calendars too is another thing that's been really nice that we were not using prior to this. And now it's really easy to look and see where or who is working with a student at a particular time. And is it possible for me to zoom in to somebody else's lesson?
Absolutely. Yeah, that collaborative experience we have, bringing our whole team together so that we can connect on all the different areas as a whole team. All right, so we started talking a little bit about technology. So let's go do more of a deeper dive into the technologies that are available, readily available in all of the platforms that we already use. Okay, so there is a lot out there to learn. And so for me, it's really important to think about that this, right now it feels like there's so much information. How do we sort through it? How do we really get what we need out of there? But there are a lot of resources out there. The picture I have on the screen is using the immersive reader in Minecraft, which is an amazing thing. So I'll talk more about immersive reader in a minute, but there's all these assistive technologies that are built right into all these different platforms and giving our students the opportunity to engage with the same things that their peers are engaging with. So let's dig in a little bit. To start with, talking about across platform. There's accessibility tools built into Microsoft, into Windows, into Microsoft 365, into Apple, and into Google. So let's dig into a few of those. So Microsoft, we have the Ease of Access Center, Immersive Reader, Accessibility Checker, dictation, Focus Assist Narrator. And I'll dive into a few of those deeper in a minute. And Apple also has the ability to hover over text, VoiceOver, which is text to speech, adding closed captions and text to speech dark mode so you get that high contrast, and adding in audio descriptions, which is fantastic to have those audio descriptions if a video is not quite the visual and the audio don't quite do enough to really understand the context. Google also has a lot of built-in tools, the Chromebox, the screen reader, using keyboard shortcuts, Google Voice, captions, and the ability to zoom in. And with Google, all the third-party extensions that you can pull in, like read and write, into the Google platform. So what we have seen in the last, I've been doing assistive technology for a long time, but especially since 2009, when I was working at the Washington State School for the Blind as a distance education math teacher, the amount of energy and time that has gone into putting these assistive technologies, all these accessibility features directly into the platform. It really gives our students the opportunity to use the off-the-shelf technologies. And it makes them, one of my favorite quotes is, students would rather go without than stand out. So if they can have as much technology that is built into their device and not have to be, that's not bolted on, but is built in, then especially in high school, the kids are more willing to use it if they don't stand out. So all of these tools built right in are so incredibly important to get to know and learn about, so you can help your students really access all the content that they need to. Okay, the next slide. So I'm going to talk about Windows accessibility because that's where most of my experience is in the Microsoft platform. So I want to talk about the accessibility built right into Windows 10. So if I go to, well, first let's talk about the slide. So across the board, all the platforms, we really want to think about how can we make our computer easier to use. So we think about it from a vision lens, making it easier to see or use without a screen. Hearing, make your device easier to hear or use without sound. And physical, make your device easier to use if you have limited reach or strength, if you need to use the keyboard with just one hand using sticky keys, toggle keys. And then cognition, making it easier to focus and get things done. Okay, that is one 100% of the people on the planet need, is that focus to get things done, especially now when we have kids at home and we have jobs that we need to do. How can we make a few things easier to be able to focus? And so we can talk a little bit about that. But let's dive into the Ease of Access Center. So this is actually built right into Windows 10. And so you can just go to search for it, just Ease of Access Center. It's in the settings, and actually show from settings. So all the Windows settings, and then we have right over to the right, it says Ease of Access Center. So when I click on this, it has all these different options. And what's really great, it's broken down into 3 sections. So we have vision. What can I do to make the computer easier either to see or to use without a screen? Hearing, how can I make my computer easier to use if I have a hearing impairment? And interaction, speech, keyboard, mouse, eye control. So let's dig into a few of these. Display, you can make things look differently. The mouse, this is one of my favorite tools because I know that kids will get a specific program added onto their computer just because they need a larger mouse. And now, and it was such a requested feature, I can make my mouse absolutely giant. We always call this the big green monster. And so this mouse is huge. And so it's easy to see on the screen. You can make it any color you want and really personalize it to your experience. So,
can I just say also, that was something that I put on my computer once we started online learning, because I would have students with low vision and I would be trying to point at something and they couldn't see it. But I've liked it so much, I've just kept it.
Yeah, so that's, Sarah, thank you. That's a really great best practice. Mm-hmm. Thinking about, like, you may like that or your student may need it, but in this distance learning, being able to quickly and easily navigate to where the teacher is pointing to.
Yeah.
And, you know, thinking about our younger students, like in the classroom, a lot of teachers use big giant pointer hands, and so you can see on the board. It's very similar to that. And I know the kids really like it when you have a giant green or pink mouse that they can see on the screen. So it's pretty fun. Magnifiers. So magnifiers are built right into Windows 10. So you can turn them on and you can have different views, just a window, or you can have the whole thing magnified or a dock, and then it's easy to turn on and off. And there's a whole bunch of different options in there. And this is a really neat one, is color filters. So if a student has color blindness, then you can turn on color filters and you can try them out and see the different ways that you need to, whatever works best for you for color filters. High contrast, your whole entire computer becomes different contrast. And narrator, this is the Windows built-in screen reading program that will read everything on your computer. Hearing, audio, and this is actually one that I really like. It's called mono audio, where you can have the sound go to just one side of a set of headphones. So if you have hearing in one ear, that's better. The sound will just go to one side. So if it's a stereo sound, you might miss something because it's going to the other side where the hearing is not as good. The other thing is a lot of kids will do mono audio, so they'll have one headphone off so they can hear what's going on around them in the classroom too. Not always good for all kids, but really it's a great way to really tweak it. You can, personalize your captions. You can use speech to text, a lot of options. There's keyboard options, sticky keys, toggle keys, and this is great for our students with mobility issues who only use one hand and you can not have to do multiple keys at a time. And this is also where you can find predictive text that you can use across Windows. Mouse options and third-party eye control is built in here when you have a third-party eye device. So in a nutshell, that's the Ease of Access Center. And I really encourage all parents and staff and students to go through and really figure out how you can really personalize the experience with your computer to make it exactly how you need it. Okay, so let's talk about what we're dealing with right now. So now we're really focusing in on video conferencing, because we all are doing conferencing. We're all connecting with our students, and our families are connecting with teachers, and students are on meetings all the time. And there's actually a lot of accessibility built right into these programs. So we have Teams, we have Zoom, Google Meet, and WebEx. So there's a lot of things, and all of these platforms are making them better and better all the time, because as the days go by, as the weeks and the months, they see the need for everybody. So Teams, live automatic captions, and you can translate these. So you can have live captions in a different language, which is fantastic. You get automatic transcripts in both Teams and Zoom, and that's really great. So if your student misses a class, or they're not able to hear it, if it's for whatever reason, they can go back and read the transcripts that go along with the lesson, so they're not missing out. Backgrounds, the ability to blur across the board on a lot of these platforms. You can use it with a screen reader, keyboard shortcuts, eye control, and all these different things, and spoken feedback and live captions and low vision support. So all these platforms are building these things in, and it's important to know and go learn in depth about what platform you're using, and understanding what your student needs to be successful in a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting or a Google Meet, what have you. Okay, so thinking about video conferencing, there are a few things that are good to remember, and about how to produce these to make sure that it's accessible for all of your students. Captions are critical. All your videos, add captions. YouTube, you can automatically have captions added. You upload it and you add the captions to the video. Stream in Microsoft tools. Again, you can upload your video and then you can have automatic captions added. So it's much simpler than it used to be. Using simple designs, so that way if you have a student who's trying to read captions and see the content, make sure everything on that screen is important to the context. So you're not just adding extra things. It makes it very visually cluttered for our low vision kids, but also making sure that you don't miss something because there's too much on the screen. Using a natural, clear conversational voice, so that those facial cues are really important. And if you're talking loudly, it looks like you're talking loudly, but also being able to, and this is more comfortable when somebody's talking and not yelling at you. So that's always a nice thing when you feel like someone's talking to you, not yelling at you. And lighting is imperative, and giving enough time to process information, speaking slowly, putting in pauses, and using both auditory and visual modalities to relay information so everybody can get that. And important, no flashing content, because that can be a trigger for some students. All right. Okay, so learning management system accessibility. So even our learning management systems have built-in accessibility tools. So the screenshot that I have up on the screen is the You Do It, which is the accessibility checker built right into Canvas. So it will go through your entire course and tell you if there's a picture missing alt text, if there's no table headers, and all these different pieces that are important and for your student to be able to access all this information. So, and that's really important because we have the learning management system. We've talked about all these different tools and platforms, but there are some other tools that you can use to make your students' access a lot easier, not only from the student point of view, but having the teachers be able to see what your kids are doing. So video conferencing goes both ways, but sometimes we need a little bit more. So an occupational therapist who's doing handwriting, or a TBI who's doing Braille might need a document camera or something like that. So Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about how a document camera would be great to use for your students?
Yes. Oh my goodness. So in the spring, when all of this happened so quickly, I found that the students that I had with multiple impairments who I was teaching Braille to, I was able to send Braille stories or worksheets home, but there was no way for me to see my students' hands. And for my older students or typically developing students, where I didn't need to worry about seeing their hands as they were reading, it didn't make so much of a difference. But now our district has ordered document cameras that will be able to set up at the student's house and be able to see their hands. Sometimes in the spring, I would have students who would lose their place on a page, and I would have the print copy of the document and trying to tell them where to move their hands. And so yes, I'm very excited. That's going to be it's going to make a big difference.
Oh, absolutely. That's going to be great. And again, it's the next layer of connection with your kids. And another story that a student second grader doing occupational therapy and was doing handwriting. And he had a document camera and was writing, and his OT did as well. And it was twofold, is that she was able to show him exactly what was happening, but being able to see her hand and do the writing helped him really feel connected to her. So it wasn't just the text going onto the screen, which is, if you do digital inking, that's fantastic and it's going on the screen. But watching her hand, seeing her hand posture, seeing how she was writing, and that human connection, I think it helped him connect to the content and be able to make those light bulb moments of like, oh, okay, so if I hold my pen like this and this is what I do, just like Miss Dana, then and then he was able to do that. So it was a really great experience to see and think about how we can create this greater experience with more connection to our students. All right. Okay, so we're actually going to take a moment, and I'd like everybody to think about, how are you going to ensure your students have the technology they need to be successful in a remote or school-based learning environment? And so we're going to give you about a minute and just to think about that, and write it down on a piece of paper, type it, but also post a comment in the chat for others to see. And I'm excited to see what this kind of has made you think about as we're going through this. So I'll set the timer for about a minute, and then we'll be back. All right, that's about a minute. So let's move on forward. So now actually we're going to dive deeper in talking about students who are blind or have a visual impairment. And so Sarah is going to give us a lot of really great information about all these different things that we can do with these kiddos.
All right. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited about this slide, because something that we put on here last week actually just happened today during one of my students' lessons, in terms of having a good setup for the learning area. Actually, it was the same student with the who didn't have the document camera in the spring. I really wanted her to have an independent area where she could access her materials on her own. Previously, she didn't have any bins or boxes to keep her things, and so if we needed her to have her braille writer or to get extra paper, she typically had to call for her parents to come in and help move things around. But today when I saw her, she's got a whole setup with some bins to keep all of her materials contained. She's able to find everything. So that was really exciting. I checked in with all of my students to see if they needed a cane for their hook. I'm sorry, a hook for their cane. I'm also an orientation and mobility specialist. We usually just call it O&M. So for those of you who don't know, orientation mobility teaches students with blindness the safe and independent skills for traveling within their environment. And so most of my students have a white cane. And I always want to make sure that they've got a place either at school or at home where they've got a hook that they can store it, or so they can always find it. So I made sure to send cane hooks home for this home learning in the fall as well. I guess we talked about the document camera. I've also heard of some other teachers of the visually impaired who have used a separate phone. I guess if families have extra phones around the house, that they're able to set that up. I don't know, Robin, if you have had experience with doing that, and they can.
What's really neat because you can take a phone. The camera still, even if your phone is not connected to service, you can actually take it and use the camera function and connect it to your computer and use that as a separate camera. So you can set it on top of a little rack. I even saw somebody use the shelf out of a glass shelf out of a refrigerator in order to use that as a platform for the camera. So it sits on top of the glass shelf, and so you can use it as the camera for the document camera. So that's a really great way to kind of the hacks, because not everybody has access to a document camera. So it's important that we come up with creative ways in order to give these tools for our students to access.
Yeah, like I said, I have not actually used the phone with anybody, but I think that would work as well. And something else that just occurred to me, I know that sometimes when you're working at home, sometimes whatever setup you have for your student may not be the same size or height as the desk at school. And so I've also talked with parents about, if you've got a student if their legs are dangling, you might want to stick a box or maybe even some cushions or something so that they can have their feet planted, which will really help when they're writing with their braille writer. So that's something else that would help. Working on having a simple background. When I first started this remote teaching, I spent most of my time out in my dining room, and there was a big picture on the wall behind me and a table that had candlesticks and all this. And when you think about students with cortical visual impairment, where you're really trying to get rid of clutter, in the beginning, when I would have those lessons on those days, I would go around and I would take everything off the wall behind me and make sure that I had a clean background. But now I've moved into my spare bedroom. It's a bit of a smaller space, but at least my students with low vision, it's easier to see. I often try to wear something that's dark colored to contrast with the wall, and so something else to think about, lighting from behind. I know I've seen a lot of, with all the Zoom meetings that I've done, oftentimes people will sit in front of a big window, but it just completely blocks out all of their features. And so even though it might be very pretty back there to see the trees or whatever, I think trying to get rid of any extra light from behind you. I think that's true as well. I talk to teachers in the classroom about standing anywhere but in front of windows when you're lecturing. I think that would be good for even students who are deaf or hard of hearing, our students with low vision. If you're not aware of what DCMP is, that's a described captioning and media program. It's a free program that you can sign up for. I believe that both teachers and parents can have different accounts, but it includes both audio description for students with vision loss. It's got closed captioning for students with hearing loss. Oh, there we go. You are able to type in if there's a subject. This morning I was looking for a story for one of my students on goats. So I was able to type in a topic. You can look under grade level, and they're already accessible stories.
There we go. Oh, it popped to the beginning of the presentation. Well, that's always interesting. Technical difficulties, but as teachers, we all experience technical difficulties, and so we just roll with them.
Yeah. Something else that was a great learning experience for me between the spring when all of this started and now, having all of your content available before your lesson. If you know you're going to be showing a website or a story or something from YouTube, if you open up all of those windows and just have those ready to go. When I first started in the spring, I would share my screen and then say, oh, okay, now let me type in and find this video. And so my lessons didn't run as smoothly. And so now that I've been able to think through what I'm going to be using, I can have everything ready to go. And then I guess, yeah, like I said, this DCMP, definitely worth taking a look at. They've got lots of great educational videos that are just ready to go and completely accessible.
All right, so question for you. So have you, what are your thoughts on having content ready for students, like available for students before the lesson to peruse and to look at before the lesson?
Yes, absolutely. If it's something that you can post or send to them ahead of time, I've even done that. Even if it's a website, maybe I'll just email it to my student the day before and say, hey, this is what we're going to be looking at ahead of time. So yes, anything you can get to the students before the lesson, great idea.
Awesome. So, and then the creating accessible content, actually, I'm going to show everybody what this is all about. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, another PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to be pushing out to my students. And one thing that I've realized over the years is I look at my population of students and I say, all right, I don't have a student in my class who needs accessibility checked or any of that stuff, but we don't know who is all at home who will be helping the student. So we need to ensure that all content is accessible regardless of who we think our audience is. We never know who the exact audience actually is. So it's really important that we check all content for accessibility. So under the review tab, I have a tool called Check Accessibility. So when I click on this, I get a pane that opens up on the right, and it tells me everything that is wrong with my PowerPoint or my Word document or OneNote or all these different programs or whatever programs, or like in Canvas. What is happening in my document, my materials, that will make it hard for someone to access? So we have this PowerPoint on kinetic and potential energy. So the first thing I see are these errors. It's telling me that we are missing alternative text. So alternative text, I'm going to go ahead and click on that. So I have a picture here, and it's the text that is attached to the picture, so a screen reader can go read through this and describe what is happening in this picture. So I have a little arrow down, and I'm going to click on that, and it gives me recommended actions. So you can add a description or mark as decorative. So if this was just a picture of like a shape or an icon or something that does not add meaning to my document, then I would just mark it as decorative. But this picture is important, so I would just click on add a description, and then I can add my description about the bicycle. The energy in is a bicycle going up the hill, potential energy is a bicycle stopped, and energy out is a bicycle going down the hill. So there's enough information that you can get the context and the understanding of that graphic in text only, and then the screen reader will read it. So that's alt text. So we have one. That's actually, we did pretty good. This presentation only has one. Slide title, and then we need to add a slide title to this PowerPoint. And over on the left, we see we're missing a slide title. Again, a screen reader without a title has to read everything, and you can't just scan. Like, we will look at a PowerPoint visually and read the titles, but a screen reader will read everything if it doesn't have that title. So it's really important. We have some hard to read text. So we have a block of text. Our title is purple background with blue letters. I can barely make out what it says. I think it says kinetic energy, but it's saying, hey, nobody's gonna be able to read this. You need to change it. And so it gives you the options to change it, the font color, right in the tool, which is really great. So cell issues, duplicate slides, and then there's the intelligent services, which gives you suggested text. So this is a habit that everybody needs to get into when you are creating work to send out to your students, that or you are even creating something for anybody, that you check it for accessibility. Make sure that whatever your audience is, it's almost the stranger test. Can a stranger read this if I don't know anything about them? So just make sure you're running the accessibility checker. And in Canvas, same thing. Creating all of this accessible content is really a critical thing to do. All right, sorry to interrupt you, Sarah, go ahead.
I think so much of what we've been working towards during this time when we're not all in the same building is really taking a team approach with all of our students and keeping in mind the student, the family, the school. For those of you who are not familiar with the expanded core curriculum, that's the body of knowledge that students who are blind or have low vision oftentimes need to be specifically taught because they're not able to just observe their environment incidentally. So a lot of those areas do include things like assistive technology, independent living skills, orientation and mobility, career education. So even though we're still home during this time, there are so many things that we can still be working on with our students. So for parents, you know, definitely get in touch with your teacher of the visually impaired for other ideas to work on. Build a schedule where you can authentically be working on some of these skills. I've just sent home information for my families to practice setting the table with a student, or you might work on loading and unloading the dishwasher, or how to fold clothes after you've done laundry. So there's so many things that if you check in with your teacher of the visually impaired, they can help you come up with all kinds of fun things to work on at home. Families as your partner, again, talk with your school teams and see if you can help with collecting data. That's something that doesn't always need to be done at school. We can take data that you've noted at home. I think we talked about this earlier in terms of scheduling. Now that we have the ability to share calendars and see when my student maybe has OT or PT, if I can come in and join one of those lessons and observe and maybe take data during that time, that's great. Working on role release strategies for families. And so that would be where the teacher teaches a skill. In my case, it might be I don't know, tracking Braille or using the white cane, and then talking with the family to say, so during these non-school times when the student is not with me, these are things that you can continue to support. And when we're actually in school in the buildings, those are things that I really work on with collaborating with other team members to make sure that, again, during those times that I'm not there to walk with the student out to PE or recess or whatever, that they can, other people can be supporting students during those times. So talk with your teachers and see where you might be able to help with role release strategies as well.
Fantastic.
All right, so as I mentioned, O&M is short for orientation and mobility, and so typically with my students, I'm out in all kinds of environments throughout the school day. With my older students, we might be working on accessing public transportation, or street crossing skills, or money management and shopping skills. My younger students, we might be learning how to use a tactile map to navigate a route, even just within the school building. So in terms of mobility skills, I know that right now, at least in my district and a lot of other districts in the surrounding areas, we are not allowed to be out on the city bus or to be doing in-person mobility lessons. So again, talk with your orientation and mobility specialist and see what kinds of things you can do either virtually with the O&M teacher or as a family. In the spring, I did some scavenger hunts with my students, depending on their ages or whatever. Sometimes we would each set our phone. We would have something specific that we would both be looking for, set our phone for 6 or 8 or 10 minutes and say, okay, so we're both going to go find something that is rectangular shaped, something that is round, and something that is green. And then we'll meet back in 8 minutes and share what we found. The Paths to Literacy website is a great resource. Check, wait, go back. Well, yeah, well, wait, I forgot, we listed it twice. Check with your district. I think this is really important to see if they will allow small group or social group lessons. Right now, my district has allowed us to do that. So we have done both social group. I think in the spring we would have just once a week. I think we did it, and now I think we might try to do it twice a month, where we invited all of the students with blindness and low vision, and sometimes we would have a particular topic or a video that we were going to watch, and other times it strictly was just social, where the kids could chat and get to know each other. We had 3 students in my district this last year who all 3 transitioned from elementary school to middle school, and 2 of them were at the same school. 1 was at a different school, but now all 3 of them are at the same school. So we did social groups just for the 3 of them. We were able to work on these expanded core areas during some of these chats. For orientation and mobility, if you are familiar with Homebound for Adventure, that was a podcast that an O&M specialist from here in Washington at the State School for the Blind put together in the spring. I think there were 8 or 9 episodes, but she covers a different topic in each one, and my students absolutely loved it. I actually had an email from one of my students over the summer asking if we were going to have the chance to do more listening to this podcast. And I emailed the teacher who put that together last week, and she was like, no, unfortunately, she's not going to be doing any more. But my students are thrilled to be able to go back and re-listen to those. So if you're not familiar with Homebound for Adventure, definitely check that out for your students who are learning orientation and mobility.
All right, are you ready?
Yes.
All right, now we can do this. Okay.
So now, Paths to Literacy. If you're not familiar with this website, definitely bookmark this. There are so many resources and ideas on here. Back in the spring, I had actually written this. I can't remember. It's, I don't know, 5 or 6 lessons on becoming oriented to the kitchen. So I've got one lesson that's specific to learning about your refrigerator, and then the next one is learning about your freezer and learning about your pantry, and the last lesson was to put a simple recipe together. So lots and lots of resources on Paths to Literacy. For students with cortical visual impairment or CVI, there's resources on Paths to Literacy. There are separate websites for students with CVI. And I can't remember what the other link was that we included, Robin. Was it?
Family Connect?
Family Connect. Oh, that's another one. Right there's an article on that expanded core curriculum. So I'm sure you'll find different ideas or activities on there that you can either check on at home or send to the rest of your team members at school. Just another really good resource.
Great.
Okay, so now we're going to take a minute and you can think about what expanded core curriculum or ECC areas that you can work on with your child at home.
They don't necessarily have to be a student with visual impairment. All these areas are great for all of our kids, so take a moment. All right, great. Hopefully you guys had some great ideas that you got to jot down about all these different amazing skills that all of us need to know. Okay, so we talked about students with visual impairments. Now let's talk about students with deafness and hard of hearing, who are hard of hearing. So first thing I want to talk about is we talked a lot about creating content and experience for students who are blind, visually impaired. Now let's talk about that same kind of content for students who are deaf or hard of hearing. And we talked a little bit about that. So thinking about what we need to do to make the experience as inclusive and as accessible as possible. So just some tips. So really thinking about all visuals during a presentation, clear, clean and simple. Like this slide doesn't have a whole bunch of extra pictures on it. So that way, especially when you're talking about it, that the student has enough time to read everything on the slide before you move on and understand the context. And again, going back to what we talked about with having materials accessible ahead of time so that students can preview them. So that way, when you're going through them, a student can focus more on the captions or the interpreter instead of trying to have all this content as brand new, where they already have a little bit. Of course, as teachers, we're always enriching the content, and so the slide or the materials become the basis for it, but it's also important so they have that piece, but they're able to get the information that you're telling them just as much as what's on the screen. Super important. Add content that adds value. Avoid decorative items. That's really crucial. So that's an overlap from both blind, visually impaired and deaf, hard of hearing. Is like that content. Sometimes, you know, we like to make things look nice. Yes, but we have to be very thoughtful of our audience and make sure that we have that the content comes first and the pretty comes second. It's really about function over fashion in this instance. Using multiple modalities for both audio and visual for all of your content. So if you are going to use like a great example is like a stop sign. A stop sign is red, and then you also have the word stop sign. So you have the visual of the shape and the color, but then the words are just as important, and somebody doesn't understand that. But you can also add that audio piece on top and saying stop sign. So it's using all those modalities to make sure everybody gets all of the content. And thinking about videos too, we talked about that you're using both modalities. So there's not just audio on video or just visual, that it's a nice mix of both. All videos have to contain captions. That is critical. I mentioned this before, and I just can't stress it enough, that you can upload videos to YouTube, and use their auto captioning system, and you can edit those and stream as well. You upload them, and then you can go through and edit if the auto captioning didn't get it correctly. You can make those changes so that your captions are just right. And then have content available on demand to review before and after lessons. So that way it's just perpetually up there, and then adding in those transcripts. So that way a student can not only see the content and they have the audio track, but they can also read it and match up if they're just not quite understanding something, that you have all of those different options available. So what's the setup? What does a good setup look like for a student who has a hearing impairment or is deaf? Dual monitors are really nice, because if you have 2 monitors and you're using an interpreter, everything, real estate on a screen is critical, because the more things you have open, everything shrinks and gets smaller and smaller on your screen. So if you have 2 monitors, you can have the interpreter on one screen and then the content on another screen, but make sure they're really close together, and just, you have to play with it to make sure what works, but that way you can actually see everything you need on the screen. Simple backgrounds. In Zoom and in Teams, you can change your background, you can blur it out, so that way there's not a lot of extra noise, visual noise of what's going on, and so you can focus on the content. Another important thing is, I just lost my train of thought. So, background effects, and again, like Sarah said, clothing. Not like, it's fun to wear a shirt every now and again that's wild and crazy, but make sure that it's not distracting for a student who is trying to focus on either reading your lips or is just trying to do facial expressions, and that it's doesn't become visually cluttered. Connecting assistive listening devices to the computer, actually, because you can use hearing aids and headphones. They can be connected right to the computer, so the sound is actually not coming from the computer and then to the hearing aids. It's coming, and so the sound is being picked up by the hearing aids from the computer speakers. It's coming directly into the hearing aids from the computer, which is a really great option. So you're not, it doesn't distort, and so that is a direct sound. Noise canceling headphones are really great because they filter out all that background noise, and it's not always possible for our kiddos to be in a space that is silent. If we have multiple students in the same room, in the same house, and lawnmowers outside, I have that problem a lot here, and so my noise canceling headphones are a lifesaver because I can put them on, it cancels out all the background noise, and I can really focus on what I need to be focusing on. Again, and then the quiet space when you can get it is making sure that quiet space for focus, for no ambient noise, are really good strategies to help our students. All right, Sarah, how about talking about our students with mobility or multiple impairments?
Excellent. All right. So again, as we've already talked about, just trying to stay organized and having a joint calendar where everybody can see where all of the different lessons and appointments can be really helpful. I've been working just the last couple weeks building a schedule with the whole team for my students with multiple needs. Checking in with the team to see if there's times where we can collaborate and join in on each other's Zoom lessons. And again, like I mentioned, as an itinerant teacher, where I might be in 4 different schools throughout the day that are not close together, oftentimes I'll talk to an OT or PT and I'll say, well, I work with the student on Mondays and Wednesdays, and they say, oh, well, I'm only at the school on Fridays. And so just trying to collaborate can be a little tricky, but this has been really great. Ensure that all the goals are appropriate. That's something else that my district has been working on right now. Due to our school closures, there are some goals that we're not able to work on. Again, like I mentioned, any community, mobility. And so we've been working with the team to see if we can amend the IEP and come up with other goals or joint goals together. And I think too, we just have to keep in mind that, thinking about just the natural part of the day and how can we incorporate, as a whole team. And maybe there's a concept that you're working on with a student. It might be a motion or a word or a concept. And how can everybody throughout the day with your lesson be able to incorporate that? And again, just making sure that all of the families have all of the equipment that they need. Again, whether it's the document camera to see the Braille or other equipment that you had easy access to in the classroom or at school, making sure that families have access to it at home as well.
All right, you ready for the next?
Yeah.
All right.
Again, so collaborating with your team, again, figuring out how parents and caregivers can work on lessons and activities. Again, I mentioned that role release. I think we've been working with parents to see how they can help with data collection. That's something where if it's a concept that they're working on, teachers can send data sheets to the families. I've been asking all of my families that if they're willing to please take a video of your student working on a concept at home, whether it's because it's going well and you want to show how it's going, or maybe something's not going as well. If you're willing to send just a short video clip, then the team can take a look and help problem solve and see how we can assist just through Zoom while you're working on your daily routines at home.
So Sarah, do you think that being able to have this collaboration with the families and connecting, you're able to see parts of the student's life and taking those skills out of the classroom and home? Like, what's your experience with that?
Well, yeah, so I mean, since this is all still relatively new, but this is definitely something that I hope will continue even after we are back in the school buildings and not teaching remotely. I really, really hope that school teams will still encourage families to help with taking data and sending home videos of those non-academic times, because I think it's so important that it's not that we're working on a skill just in isolation, just during Miss Sarah's time, that it needs to be something that's happening throughout the day, whether I'm there or not. So yeah, I think that's really important.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about speech language. All right.
All right. So again, during this time, having access to your video conferencing, your Zoom chats, like Robin mentioned, I think just making sure that you've got a quiet space for your child to be working in, having a good microphone, both for the teacher and the student. Robin mentioned the noise canceling headphones, which are helpful. Using OneNote or Flipgrid for activities that are happening asynchronously. I know that some schools are doing a combination of live lessons and then recorded lessons that families can access at different times throughout the day. Incorporating fun activities, finding routines. I think when we're thinking about homework, it can be just a fun activity reward system. I guess we haven't talked about that with any of our kids, but I think that too, collaborating with your team and making sure, if it's, a star chart or a sticker chart, get the family involved, the school team involved with that. And maybe you come up with an agreement that the student has to earn, 10 stickers a week. Communicate with your team and say, you know what, I think Johnny earned his 2 stickers for today during speech time because of something that he worked on, or, a student read 2 pages of her Braille book, so we're going to give her a sticker for that. And then just making it fun. Even though we're at home, I think there's just so much that we can be doing. Still lots of connection with teams, and just making it fun for students and the teachers too, I think.
Absolutely, I could not agree with you more. It's thinking about this. There's a lot of challenges we're having, especially with our kids with higher needs, trying to, how are we going to make this happen? And clearly, if we had the answer, we'd be telling you exactly what to do. And these are our strategies and tools that we found have been working, and there is not an exact science to this, and there is not a simple or one answer that what we can do. And I feel like the overwhelming kind of theme to what we're talking about is really making those connections and collaborations with your team. And like we have Flipgrid where you can make videos and send them back and forth and have all these opportunities. But it's really about those connections. It's really about those collaborations that we have with our kids and our families to make it work during this time.
Yeah, and I hope that families, if you are feeling overwhelmed, or there is just, I've had parents say, oh my gosh, my child is on Zoom, 8 or 10 times throughout the day, and it's hard to coordinate with, me trying to get work done and helping, siblings and all of that. Please let your team know. And I'm sure that, again, everybody can work together and maybe try to double up on lessons or figure out how to make it work. It's something, none of us have had to go through this, so we're all still just trying to learn and figure it out as we go, and
as a team, and make sure that we can do this, because at the end of the day, making sure our students have what they need is the imperative, and we can do it, and we just need to work together. And there are so many tools out there already that we can use in order to help facilitate this. And as the time goes on, they'll get better and better. And so we're working at it. And so what we learned is there's a lot of resources out there, and this is the website education.microsoft.com for all the Microsoft tools. And we will be having a Wakelet that's available for everybody with all the websites that we talked about, and all the resources we talked about today will be available for everybody. So there's Microsoft's, and then we have Google as well, Google's accessibility for education, and the website is down there, whygoogle/accessibility. And then Apple as well has their accessibility. It's apple.com/accessibility, and all of their features and everything. And it's great because you can go and learn a lot more about all of these tools. So this was just a high-level overview of what's out there. So I encourage you to go explore and to learn more about all of these tools and how they can apply to your child and to your student. So now actually, you'll be getting a survey about the conference, about the session that you get to fill out in about a week's time. And what we're going to do now is we will open up the floor for questions. So we're going to go live, and so either put them in the chat or come off mute and ask your questions. But so thank you for participating today.